With the interior now completed, it was time to focus my attention on some of the final tidbits of the exterior that needed to be finished before the final assembly could start. Now, of course, I did the carbon fiber roof, and I wanted to do multiple other carbon fiber pieces but not go overboard. So I decided just to do the spoiler on the rear view mirrors, and that's it, alongside the roof, of course. All of the lower parts, like the side skirt extensions, the front splitter, and the rear diffuser, I just painted in a gunmetal and left it at that. So first I applied the carbon fiber decal to the top of the spoiler, then the bottom side. Also did it to the mirrors, let that cure, and applied a glossy clear coat. And while that was drying, I moved on to some other pits that needed to be cut out and cleaned up before I could start adding some primer and paint to them. While the paint is drying on all of those parts, I can move on to where I finished off in the last episode. That is actually with the interior. All of these parts need to be installed on the inside of the body. They don't really go together as with a standard kit, but they need the actual body of the kit to fully be assembled. With the interior in, I could move on to putting the chassis on as well. This is simply just glued in place. There are some screws included, but the holes aren't really all that well pre-drilled, and a bit of glue holds it in just as good and is a lot easier. On the exterior side, I needed to move on to some final details there as well. The rear shark fin antenna was put on the roof, and the door handles were glued in place. Some small photo etch pieces for some mesh grills were also installed on the sides for the front fenders, on the hood, and then later on also in the front bumper. On the side of the headlight bucket there was a small photo etch piece that needed to be glued on as well, and I also wanted to detail it up a little bit more. I deviated from the original design of the headlights by painting them black, but I didn't want them to be one big black piece, so the side piece I left in silver, and the surrounding areas on the main beam I painted in a gunmetal, and the inside of the lens was painted in a silver to give it a nice reflective finish. The taillights on the rear, the inside housings were painted silver with the airbrush, and then the main lenses were also painted clear red with the airbrush, again to get a nice smooth and consistent finish. Now normally these would be available in a variety of different colors depending on the model year you have, I'm pretty sure. I decided to go with a full red as I really like that clean look. And normally I believe there is a small section in the center which is either clear or in a different color, or maybe even a little bit of a smoke tinted finish. But for me, the red looks really smooth and really clean, so that is what I went with. I then moved on to finishing off the chassis side of things by gluing all of the disc brake parts together along with the calipers and the main suspension pieces to hold it all up. Three of the wheels are really simply just glued in place and fit together really nicely, and the fourth and final one on the front didn't really sit all that well. It stuck out a little bit too much, so that needed a small amount of adjustment. I simply just filed away a little bit of the way that it mounts in there, and then it could be slid in a little bit deeper to have a flush alignment. Once that was done, I could move on to finally putting on the clear parts. Now with these Alfa model kits, this is always the part that I dread the most. The clear parts themselves are cut out of a flat piece of clear plastic. They are pre-painted and pre-cut, so that does make it a lot easier, but most of the time the pieces that it needs to be glued to, like the body in this case of course, has a bit of a curved or contoured shape, and therefore it does need a specific glue to hold it in place pretty strong, as regular wood glue or just standard clear parts glue isn't really all that strong to hold it in place and conform it to the shape. So I decided to use Super Gold Plus. This is of course a super glue, and it can hold the parts in pretty nicely and should hold them there permanently. However, during the installation you need to be extremely careful, as this glue sticks to pretty much anything permanently really fast and can ruin or smudge the parts permanently. So for me, always pretty nerve-wracking to do this, and I really make sure that I take my time so that I don't ruin anything and the parts are where they need to be the first time around. After installing all of the glass all around, I moved on to just letting it sit and cure for a bit before touching it again, and in the meantime just started on the grills and some other various bits around. Even though it is super glue, it does still stay tacky pretty long, specifically if there are small puddles that haven't been covered by parts or stuff like that, so stay away from it for a little while before you remove the protective covering on top of it. In this case there is a clear protective sheet of plastic on top of it, which does still need to be peeled off, and I'm also going to need to install the window frames later, but for now I'm just going to move on to the other details in the meantime. With all of the other tidbits now installed, I could move on to the window frames. Now, usually with these Alfa model kits, they aren't really all that big of an add-on, and I most of the time skip this stage. Now, in this case, it is a pretty big detail piece on the side of the car, and I absolutely had to install it. So, in order to help me install it and keep it in place permanently, I added a piece of double-sided tape to the main piece in the center with the biggest area of glue that needs to be applied. but with this double-sided tape it is a lot safer of a way to install it, and it also has a nice grab onto the clear parts themselves. So once you have it aligned on one end, you gently just press the center part in there so that it sticks down where it needs to be. Now on some of the edges and outer pieces I will be adding a super small amount of super glue to hold those in place as well. Otherwise they will just be floating and not really looking good, and also have a pretty high potential of catching your polishing cloth or anything else if you touch the model later on. So be sure that those parts are properly installed and glued down as well. A lot of times with Photo Edge upgrade sets or these Alpha model kits, you get a small sheet of actual Photo Edge window wipers. Now I don't really like the way that these assemble. They are really fragile, super sharp pieces, catch really easily on all sorts of polishing cloths or brushes to remove dust from the model, and I don't really like the way they look. So instead I just took some pieces that I had left over from a 350Z, painted those black and installed them instead, as I really like the way they look a lot better than those Photo Edge pieces. I then finalized the details on the wheels, painted the lug nuts, added all of the decals and emblems all around, and also painted some of the lower laying areas where the aerodynamic parts and pieces of the air flow through with some black paint to hide the gold paint, and the fact that there of course aren't really any aerodynamics to this model whatsoever. So I just painted them black and hid them in the background. And as a final touch, I went over all of the panel lines with a bit of Panelline accent color to make them nice and black, and also give them the shaded look to hide the gold paint that is in there and make it just a nice uniform color and have it a black shaded finish. I hope you guys enjoyed this build as much as I did. I flew through it. It assembled really easily, was a super nice kit to work with, and also a really cool color in my opinion. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought of this build and what you think I should do next.